make it very difficult to have a straightforward regulatory regime. To strike a balance between the NGO coordination board work and the songs that we keep hearing in this country every day about human rights and rights to association and so on and so forth is necessary. If today, as Minister for Interior, I ordered an audit of some of the NGOs around here, you will see NGOs in the streets saying, oh, I am taking away people's freedoms and so on and so forth. Yet in actual fact, in a serious environment where we need to be honest with one another, you should not have a problem accounting for the money that you have if you are an NGO. And if you are receiving the money from clean sources, why should you have a problem to account for it? But even then, you highlighted the problem yourself. The non-state actors are regulated across everywhere. Either they are registrar of societies, they are the NGO coordination board, they are regulated by many other agencies. Now is the time. I believe in the next report we will look at several things. One, the legislative ecosystem that we have in place, is it facilitative or inhibitive to management or money laundering? Because even formalization of our financial sector will require that we tidy up our regulatory environment and ensure that the legislative environment we have is facilitative of a more formalized economy or a more formalized financial environment, as it were. Fourthly, I would like to propose that in addition to doing a risk assessment, in future as we go forward, now let us pick out what I may call frontline institutions in this regulatory environment and scan them. Frontline institutions include, for example, the Immigration Department, which is in my ministry. I have been fighting people called second-hand motor vehicle dealers. Now, 2/3 of them don't have permits, but they are operating because they have paid some of your people and they bribe them every day. And you see, the question is, we need to scan this environment and figure out what we are going to do in terms of enforcement. Let's pick out the frontline institutions in the regulatory infrastructure and then see how we can scan and make those institutions effective. Because if immigration is not effective in terms of issuance of work permits and knowing who is around and who's doing business, who comes into the country and what they do, we'll end up with cases we have been dealing with. They have been called to Parliament before to defend so-called Turkish investors who don't even have a bank account. And they are just operating around with senior politicians and saying they're investors, carrying briefcases, and they don't even have a bank account and so on and so forth. And no one knows their address in town. Now we have Venezuelans, you know. So the issue is, if that is not tidied up, you will have a problem. Secondly, look at other regulatory actors, including our very own police. I keep talking to my brother Matiang'i every day about these challenges that we face. Enforcement and regulation must go hand in hand. I propose, Micah, that in the next study, let's categorize institutions and pick out what we call frontline institutions, scan them and figure out where the weaknesses are, because a chain is as strong as its weakest point. Where we are weak is where we need to strengthen so that we can manage and ensure that our money laundering does not affect us, as it were. Fifthly, the challenge in this case is also political will. And I think we need to explore this. I am very worried about this. I have to be frank with you. As a citizen of this country, I'm very worried about this, because all these things we are talking about, you can run down a list of actions. 2/3 of them depend on political will, because you are not going to tidy up the legislative environment if you don't have a facilitative political environment. You are not going to carry out institutional reform if you don't have a facilitative political environment. Political will to do this is very, very fundamental. That's why I'm concerned. I have said this before, and I will repeat it again without fear of contradiction. After this election, 40% of the people who sit in elective institutions are active players in money laundering and trafficking. So, do we hope that these people will actually tidy up the legislative environment? All of you Kenyans who have been moving around the villages, you have seen people who are carrying money in bags, lining up citizens, giving them 200 bobs. The bankers in the room, you understand now you have a shortage of 200 shilling notes in your banks, and 100 shilling notes in your banks, because politicians are bribing villagers. People are not working. They are standing on the roadsides to get 200 shillings and so on from all these money launderers. And they are laundering themselves into elective institutions to take decisions. Do you think they will actually tidy up the legislative environment, as it were? it's a question we have to answer. And this is where I want to challenge you, good people, because all of you are middle-class players, well-to-do people, bankers, financial experts, people who live well and drive big cars, who won't queue to vote, so that we elect a government that will sort us out. The election we are moving to will be critical in the decisions that we will take on how this issue is going to be addressed, period. Because either A, we elect a government that is cozy with money laundering because that is its way of life and it will not achieve this. Or B, we elect a government that is against money laundering, that has got a basic minimum level of integrity that will join all of us in fighting this. Because the challenges of this are real. Let's not pretend about it. The challenges of this are real. It's just that, certain things we cannot say here because, we are in open forums and so on. During the transition from the former notes to the new notes, so I thought if we gave you time to say the things you saw, it was very interesting. Car dealers changing billions of shillings. How many cars do you need to sell to be able to have billions of shillings? And all these dealers are friends of senior politicians. They are now the ones financing all these 200, 500 shilling notes arrangements in the villages and so on. This is a serious challenge that we need to deal with. Finally, I like what you say. At the face value of it, and when you look at it, and then when you look at the science of it and so on, in terms of financial transaction and how we are going to operate, we may say that we are actually safe. But I would like to challenge us, especially, and in this environment, my brother, the Inspector General, and my brother, the DPP, are very well aware of this. The expanse of crime has now gone beyond terrorism as we know it, in the traditional sense. And all of it is fueled by money laundering. Whether we are talking about very dynamic and sophisticated cybercrime that is operating around, and so on and so forth, all of it is actually financed by money laundering. I would like to urge that we step forward. We move on to the next dynamic environment and look at how best we can now tackle the complex dimensions of how money laundering is funding the negative dimensions of our lives and is going to affect us as we go along. I mean, overall, I think we may say we look like we are on a safe trajectory, but look, my friends, where we find ourselves. Look at our neighborhood. Look at who are our neighbors and what's going on in their neighborhood. It is our responsibility, collectively, public or private, to defend our financial environment, defend our country and ensure that we are safe and secure by fighting criminals, including the white-collar thugs, who will say, I'm going to call a bank, and my friend here, the vice chair of the Bankers Association, will give my friend a loan of 15 billion shillings by a phone call. That is money laundering, essentially. As it is, it's upon us, it is our responsibility to step up to this and sort out our country. No one is going to sort out this country for us. And what we are doing